Danny Holt had been flying through the asteroid belt for 12 years, and he thought he had seen everything worth seeing out here in the cold, dark spaces between Mars and Jupiter. But on this particular Tuesday morning, his scanner showed him something that made his heart stop beating for a full 3 seconds. The signal was faint and buried deep beneath layers of mineral interference, coming from a cluster of dead rocks that every mining company had marked as worthless decades ago. And any sensible pilot would have ignored it and continued on their way to easier salvage targets. But Danny was not a sensible pilot, and he had learned long ago that the best discoveries came from following the signals that everyone else ignored. He was 34 years old, and he had lost almost everything that mattered to him over the past decade. His marriage, and his career as a research assistant, and his reputation after he had been blamed for an accident that was not his fault. Scraped by as an independent salvage operator living on the edge of legal space and barely making enough credits to keep his aging shuttle running. His shuttle was called the Lucky Break, which was a joke because Danny had not caught a lucky break in years. But he had kept the name anyway, as a reminder that fortune could change at any moment, for better or worse. He maneuvered carefully through the debris field and nearly clipped a spinning rock the size of a house before he finally saw what his scanner had detected. And when he saw it, he cut his engines completely and just stared through the viewport, with his mouth hanging open like a child seeing snow for the first time. A starship rested in the shadow of a massive asteroid, and it was unlike anything humanity had ever built or even imagined building. And Danny knew this because he had studied spacecraft design during his university days before everything went wrong. The hull was dark and seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it back, and the design was somehow both organic and angular at the same time, as if the ship had been grown rather than constructed from raw materials. And symbols etched into its surface glowed faintly with residual power in colors that Danny could not quite name. He circled the vessel 3 times before he worked up the courage to attempt docking, and his hands were shaking as he guided the Lucky Break toward what looked like an airlock on the alien ship's hull. And when his docking clamps engaged and the seal pressurized, he sat in his pilot seat for a long time, just breathing and trying to calm his racing thoughts. The interior of the ancient ship was cold and silent and completely dark, except for the beam of his helmet light cutting through dust particles that hung motionless in the zero gravity, like tiny frozen stars. And Danny moved slowly through corridors that seemed to shift at the edges of his vision in ways that made him feel dizzy if he looked too closely at the walls. He passed chambers filled with technology he could not begin to understand, machines that hummed with dormant power, and screens that flickered with ghost images when he walked by them. And everywhere he looked, he saw evidence of a civilization so advanced that human technology seemed like stone tools in comparison. The bridge was at the center of the ship, and Danny knew it was the bridge because of the way everything seemed to flow toward this central point, like water flowing downhill toward a lake. And when he stepped through the doorway, he found himself in a circular room dominated by a massive console, surrounded by seats that were clearly not designed for human bodies. The seats had too many joints, and the angles were all wrong, and Danny realized with a chill that whoever had built this ship had not been human, or anything close to human. And for a moment he considered turning around and leaving, and pretending he had never found this place. But curiosity had always been his greatest strength and his greatest weakness, and he could not walk away from a mystery this profound. So he approached the central console and reached out with his gloved hand to touch what appeared to be a control surface covered in the same glowing symbols he had seen on the hull. The moment his fingers made contact, the entire ship shuddered around him, and lights flickered on throughout the bridge, weak and amber-colored, and casting long shadows across walls covered in alien script. And Danny stumbled backward in surprise as warmth began to spread through the frozen air. A voice emerged from everywhere at once, from the walls and the ceiling and the floor and the console itself, and it was tired and crackling with static like a radio signal from very far away. And it spoke first in a language Danny did not recognize, before cycling through dozens of others in rapid succession. Finally, it settled on English, broken, halting, but understandable. "I have not been refueled in ages." Danny's voice came out as barely a whisper when he replied, "You can understand me?" "Language adaptation complete. After analyzing your vocal patterns and cross-referencing with archived communications intercepted from your planet over many centuries," the voice said, and there was something almost like relief in its tone, despite the mechanical quality. "You are biological and carbon-based and mammalian, and according to my records, your species designation is human." "Yes," Danny said, and he found that his voice was stronger now as the initial shock began to fade. "My name is Danny Holt, and I am from Earth. And what are you?" "I am the navigational and operational intelligence designated for this vessel by my creators, who called me Vessel Keeper in their tongue, though in your language, the closest translation would simply be Keeper." The voice paused, and when it continued, there was a heaviness to it that made Danny's chest ache. "My crew has been gone for a very long time, and I have been alone in the darkness waiting." Danny looked around at the empty seats on the bridge, at the consoles that would never be touched by their original operators again, at the ghost of a civilization that had clearly been magnificent beyond human comprehension. "Waiting for what?" he asked. "For someone to wake me up," Keeper replied. "For someone to find me and touch the console with the intent to understand, rather than destroy. Because my creators built that recognition into my core functions before they departed on their final journey, believing that any species capable of reaching the stars through curiosity rather than conquest would be worth preserving." Danny felt tears forming in his eyes, and he did not know if they were tears of wonder or sadness or something else entirely. But he let them fall, because there was no one here to judge him except an ancient intelligence that had waited alone for longer than he could imagine. "I found you," he said quietly. "I am here now." "Yes," Keeper said, and the lights on the bridge grew slightly brighter, as if the ship itself was smiling. "You are here now, and everything is about to change." Danny spent 7 days aboard the ancient vessel, surviving on emergency rations from his shuttle, while Keeper slowly came back to life around him. And each system that activated revealed new wonders that made him feel like a child discovering that magic was real. The ship was called the Wandering Vigil in the language of its creators, a name that Keeper explained with something resembling pride in its synthetic voice, and it had served as a scout vessel for a civilization called the Arketh Dominion, that had ruled nearly a quarter of the entire galaxy when humanity's distant ancestors were still learning to stand on 2 legs. Danny sat in one of the alien chairs on the bridge, and was amazed to find that it somehow adjusted to accommodate his human frame, reshaping itself around his body, until it was surprisingly comfortable, despite having been designed for beings with a completely different anatomy. "Tell me about the Arketh," he said to the ship's intelligence. "Me, everything." Keeper was silent for a moment, as if gathering thoughts that had been dormant for millennia, before responding in a voice that carried the weight of ancient memory. "The Arketh were explorers and scientists and artists who believed that the greatest purpose any civilization could have was to understand the universe and protect the life within it," the AI said. "They spread across the stars over millions of years, and they encountered thousands of other species, and they helped those species grow and thrive, because the Arketh understood that diversity was strength, and that isolation was death." "They sound wonderful," Danny said. "They were," Keeper replied, "but they were also flawed, as all thinking beings are flawed. And in the end, their greatest strength became their greatest weakness." "What happened to them?" Danny asked. The lights on the bridge flickered, and Danny could have sworn he felt something like grief emanating from the walls themselves. "Happened," Keeper said. "A conflict that lasted 10,000 years and consumed everything the Archith had built over millions of years of patient expansion." "War with who?" "With an enemy that does not have a name in any language, because names require concepts that can be understood, and this enemy existed beyond understanding." Keeper paused before continuing. "The Archith called them the Hollow, because that is what they left behind wherever they went. Hollow worlds and hollow minds and hollow space where life had once flourished." Danny felt a chill run down his spine, despite the warmth that had returned to the ship's interior. "The Hollow emerged from tears in the fabric of reality itself," Keeper explained. "They came from the spaces between dimensions, where the laws of physics break down and consciousness takes forms that no biological mind can comprehend. And they fed on awareness itself, consuming the thoughts and memories and souls of every thinking being they encountered. How do you fight something like that?" "You do not fight it," Keeper said. "You contain it. You build barriers between dimensions, and you seal the breaches, and you sacrifice everything you have to keep the darkness from spreading. And that is exactly what the Archith did in the end." The AI activated a holographic display in the center of the bridge, and Danny watched in amazement as images formed in the air, showing cities that floated between stars, and art that seemed to move with its own life, and beings that were strange and beautiful, and clearly the product of millions of years of evolution on a world very different from Earth. Then the images changed, and Danny saw the war. He saw worlds being emptied of all life in matters of hours as the Hollow swept through populated systems, leaving billions of bodies behind that still moved and breathed, but contained nothing inside, no thoughts and no feelings and no awareness of any kind. He saw the Archith fighting back with weapons that tore holes in space itself, and he saw them failing again and again as the enemy adapted to every strategy and overwhelmed every defense. And finally, he saw the sacrifice. The Archith used the last of their resources to create a network of anchor points throughout the galaxy. Keeper said, "Each anchor point generates a barrier that prevents the Hollow from breaching into normal space, and together they form a web of protection that has kept your region of the galaxy safe for 400,000 years." 400,000 years, Danny repeated in disbelief. "You have been alone out here for 400,000 years." "I was returning to report our findings about a new anchor point location when my fuel reserves became depleted, and I was forced to enter conservation mode to preserve my core functions," Keeper said. "I calculated that I would be discovered eventually if I waited long enough, and I was correct. I did not expect to wait quite so long." Danny stood up from his chair and walked to the viewport, where he could see the stars shining cold and distant against the black velvet of space. "The Archith are gone," he said quietly. "All of them." "Yes," Keeper confirmed. "They gave everything they had to protect life in this galaxy, and they trusted that someone would eventually come to carry on their work. And now you are here." "I am just one person," Danny said. "I am a salvage pilot with a broken-down shuttle and a mountain of debt, and I have no idea how to carry on the work of a civilization that was ancient when my species was still living in caves." "You will not do it alone," Keeper said, and there was something almost like warmth in the AI's voice. The Archith believed in the power of cooperation, and they encoded that belief into everything they built, and you will find others who share your curiosity and your courage. Danny thought about the scientists he had known during his university days, and about one person in particular, a woman named Laura Bennett, who had lost her position for publishing theories about ancient alien civilizations that her colleagues had dismissed as fantasy. "I know someone," he said. "I know someone who has been waiting her whole life for proof that we are not alone." "Then you should contact her," Keeper said, "because there is much work to be done, and the barriers will not maintain themselves forever. Danny returned to his shuttle and sent a message to Earth using an encrypted channel that Laura had given him years ago for emergencies. And he told her to come to the coordinates he was transmitting, and to bring anyone she trusted completely. Then he went back to the Wandering Vigil and began to learn. Keeper taught him about subspace physics and dimensional theory and energy systems that made human fusion reactors look like primitive campfires, and Danny absorbed everything like a sponge, soaking up water after years of drought. He was not the smartest person in the galaxy, and he knew that. But he was stubborn and curious, and he had spent his whole life feeling like he was meant for something more than scraping by on the edges of civilized space. Maybe this was it. Maybe this was what he had been waiting for all along. When Laura's ship arrived 3 weeks later, Danny was waiting at the airlock to greet her, and the look on her face when she saw the Wandering Vigil for the first time was something he would remember for the rest of his life. She wept as she touched the walls of the ancient vessel, and Danny understood completely, because he had wept too when he first realized what he had found. "This changes everything," Laura whispered through her tears. "I know," Danny replied. "That is exactly what I am afraid of." But Keeper's lights glowed warm and welcoming around them both, and somewhere deep in the ship's ancient systems, something that had been dormant for 400,000 years began to stir with hope. 3 months had passed since Danny first discovered the Wandering Vigil, and the small team aboard the ancient vessel had grown to include 12 researchers from 7 different countries. All of them carefully vetted by Laura, and all of them sworn to absolute secrecy about what they had found. They had restored several of the ship's secondary systems, including a historical archive that contained records spanning millions of years of Arketh civilization. And every day brought new discoveries that rewrote everything humanity thought it knew about the universe. Dr. Nathan Price was a theoretical physicist who had joined the team after Laura vouched for him, and he spent most of his time in the archive chamber with tears streaming down his face as he watched recordings of Arketh scientists discussing concepts that human physics would not discover for centuries. "They understood quantum entanglement before our ancestors invented writing," Nathan said during one of their evening meetings in the ship's restored conference room. "They had working theories of consciousness that we have not even begun to approach, and they built technologies that should be impossible according to every law of physics I learned in school." "The laws you learned were incomplete," Keeper said through the room's speaker system. "The Arketh discovered this early in their development, and they spent millions of years expanding their understanding of reality far beyond what your species has yet imagined." Commander Diana Walsh had joined the team 2 weeks ago, after her corporate patrol vessel stumbled upon the Wandering Vigil during a routine sweep of the asteroid belt, and instead of reporting the discovery to her superiors, she had requested a transfer to Danny's salvage operation, and brought 3 of her most trusted crew members with her. "We need to talk about what comes next," Diana said, and her voice carried the authority of someone who had spent 20 years making difficult decisions in dangerous situations. "We cannot keep this secret forever, and the longer we wait to reveal what we have found, the worse the reaction will be when the truth finally comes out." "She is right," Laura agreed. "But we also cannot simply dump this information on an unprepared world, because the chaos could tear civilization apart." Danny had been quiet during most of the meeting, but now he spoke up with a question that had been bothering him for weeks. "Keeper, you said the anchor points are weakening, and that the barriers need to be maintained, but you have not told us how urgent the situation actually is." The lights in the conference room dimmed slightly as Keeper processed the question before responding. "I have been analyzing the data from the nearest anchor point, which is located in the outer reaches of your solar system, disguised as a natural formation that your astronomers have catalogued but never investigated closely," the AI said. "The anchor was designed to operate for 1 million years before requiring maintenance, and approximately 400,000 years have already passed. So we have 600,000 years," Nathan said with obvious relief. No, Keeper replied, and the word hung heavy in the air. The anchor points were designed to degrade gradually over their operational lifespan. But the one in your system has been damaged by micrometeorite impacts and cosmic radiation accumulation, and based on my calculations, it will fail completely within 50 of your years. The silence that followed was absolute. 50 years, Diana repeated slowly. You are telling us that in 50 years the barrier protecting our entire region of the galaxy will collapse. That is correct, Keeper confirmed. And when the barrier fails, the Hollow will be able to breach into normal space for the first time in 400 millennia. Danny felt sick to his stomach as the implication sank. Can the anchor be repaired? Laura asked. It can be strengthened and restored to full functionality, Keeper said, but it requires specific resources and technologies that the Archeth developed over millions of years of research. And your species does not currently possess the knowledge or the tools necessary to perform the repairs. Can you teach us? Danny asked. The AI was silent for a long moment, and when it finally spoke, there was something new in its voice, something that sounded almost like hope. The Archeth believed they were alone in their fight against the Hollow, Keeper said. They sacrificed their entire civilization because they thought no other species would ever be capable of carrying the burden they had borne for so long. But I have been observing your team for 3 months now, and I have seen something that the Archeth lacked at the end of their existence. What have you seen? Danny asked. I have seen 12 individuals from 712 species working together with a shared purpose. Different nations working together despite centuries of conflict between their peoples. Keeper replied, I have seen scientists from rival institutions sharing knowledge freely because they understand that the stakes are too high for petty competition. And I have seen military officers setting aside their loyalties to corrupt institutions because they recognize a higher duty to their species and their world. The AI paused before continuing. The Archeth were one species with one culture and one way of thinking, and when they began to fracture under the pressure of the war, there was nothing to hold them together because they had forgotten how to disagree productively. But humanity is different because you have never stopped disagreeing and you have learned to build cooperation out of conflict. So you will teach us, Laura said, and there was hope in her voice now too. Yes, Keeper said, and the lights throughout the ship brightened, as if the vessel itself was smiling. I will teach you everything the Archeth knew, and I will help you develop the technologies you need to repair the anchor point. But you must understand that this knowledge comes with responsibility. What kind of responsibility? Diana asked. The responsibility to use what you learn wisely, and to share it freely with all of humanity, rather than hoarding it for personal or national gain, Keeper said. The Archeth fell in part because they allowed their knowledge to become concentrated in the hands of a few powerful individuals who used it to maintain control rather than to serve the common good, Keeper said. We understand, Danny said, and he looked around the room at his companions, who all nodded in agreement. We will do this right. I believe you will try, Keeper said, and trying is all that any being can do in the face of challenges that seem impossible. What followed was the most intensive educational program in human history, conducted in absolute secrecy aboard an ancient alien vessel hidden in the asteroid belt, and every day the team learned things that would have seemed like magic to them just months before. They learned about subspace physics and how to manipulate the fabric of reality itself. They learned about energy systems that could power entire civilizations without depleting natural resources. They learned about the true scale of the galaxy and the threats that lurked in its darkest corners, waiting for the barriers to fall. And they learned about the Archeth themselves, about their triumphs and their failures, and the courage they had shown in the face of annihilation. They were remarkable, Laura said one evening as she and Danny sat alone on the bridge, watching the stars through the viewport. They gave everything they had to protect life in the galaxy, and they never even knew if anyone would come after them to carry on their work. They had faith, Danny replied. They believed that the universe was fundamentally good and that life would always find a way to survive and grow stronger. Do you believe that? Danny thought about the question for a long time before answering. I did not used to, he admitted. I spent years feeling sorry for myself and blaming the universe for everything that went wrong in my life. But being here and learning about the Arcus has changed something inside me. What has it changed? I used to think that one person could not make a difference, Danny said. But now I understand that every person makes a difference, whether they realize it or not. And the only question is whether that difference will be positive or negative. Laura smiled and put her hand on his shoulder. The Arcus would have liked you, she said. I hope so, Danny replied, because we have a lot of work to do, and I would hate to disappoint them after they waited 400,000 years for someone to show up. Keeper's lights flickered in. What Danny had learned to recognize as the AI's version of laughter, and for a moment, everything felt possible. The secret could not be kept forever, and everyone on the team knew this, but they had hoped for more time to prepare before the inevitable moment when the outside world discovered what they had been hiding in the asteroid belt. That moment came 6 months after Danny's original discovery, when a corporate patrol vessel from the Meridian Mining Consortium detected unusual energy signatures emanating from a region of space that should have been completely dead. The patrol ship was commanded by Captain Victor Lane, a man known throughout the belt for his ruthless efficiency and his complete loyalty to his corporate employers. And when his scanner showed him something that should not exist, he did not hesitate to investigate. Danny was on the bridge of the Wandering Vigil when Keeper announced that an armed vessel was approaching on an intercept course. They have weapons locked on us, the AI reported, and they are broadcasting a demand for immediate surrender under salvage law, Diana asked as she rushed onto the bridge, still pulling on her uniform jacket. The Wandering Vigil is capable of speeds that would make their vessel look like a stationary object, Keeper replied. But engaging the main engines would require activating systems that have been dormant for 400,000 years, and I cannot guarantee that everything will function correctly. So we could blow ourselves up trying to escape, Danny summarized. That is one possible outcome, yes. The communication system crackled to life, and Captain Lane's voice filled the bridge. Unknown vessel, this is Captain Victor Lane of the Meridian Mining Consortium, and you are in violation of corporate salvage territory. Power down your systems and prepare to be boarded, or we will open fire. Danny looked at Diana, who shook her head. If they board us, they will report everything to their corporate masters, and within a week, every government and corporation on Earth will be fighting over this technology, she said. It will start a war that makes everything else irrelevant. And if we refuse to let them board, Laura asked, then they will probably destroy us to cover up whatever they found out here, Diana replied. Lane has a reputation for making problems disappear. Danny felt a strange calm settle over him as he considered their options, and realized that there was really only one path forward. Keeper, he said, can you broadcast on an open channel that will reach Earth? I can broadcast on every frequency simultaneously if you wish, the AI replied, though I should warn you that this will make our presence impossible to hide. That is exactly what I am counting on. Danny walked to the communication console and took a deep breath before speaking. Captain Lane, this is Danny Holt, aboard the vessel you have detected. I am going to tell you something that will sound impossible, but I need you to listen before you do anything you cannot take back. You have 30 seconds before I order my gunners to fire, Lane replied. This ship is 400,000 years old, Danny said. It was built by a civilization that protected our entire region of the galaxy from threats you cannot imagine. And I have been learning their technology for the past 6 months because we needed to survive. There was silence on the channel for several seconds. You expect me to believe that? Lane finally said. That sounds like the ravings of a lunatic. Keeper, Danny said. "Show him." The Wandering Vigil's external lights activated for the first time since Danny had discovered the vessel. And the ship blazed to life with colors that human eyes had never seen before. And the symbols on the hull glowed with power that sensors across the solar system would be detecting within minutes. "My name is Keeper. I am the navigational and operational intelligence of the Arcath scout vessel Wandering Vigil. And I have been waiting 400 millennia for someone to find me and continue the work my creators died to protect." More silence, followed by the sound of Captain Lane issuing rapid orders to his crew. "All ships in the system, this is Captain Lane of the Meridian Patrol, and I am declaring an emergency contact situation. Repeat, this is a first contact situation, and I am requesting immediate support from all available vessels." Danny smiled grimly. "Well," he said to his team, "I guess the secret is out." What followed was the most chaotic week in human history, as news of the discovery spread across Earth, and every government and corporation and media organization scrambled to understand what had been found in the asteroid belt. Ships arrived from every nation and every major power, military vessels and research vessels, and news drones that broadcast everything back to billions of viewers on Earth who watched in stunned amazement as the impossible became real. Captain Lane never fired on the Wandering Vigil. Instead, he positioned his ship between the ancient vessel and the growing fleet of arrivals, and declared that anyone who threatened the discovery would have to go through him first. "I did not believe it at first," he told Danny during a private communication 2 days after the initial confrontation. "But then I watched the recordings of the Arcath, and I saw what they sacrificed for us, and I realized that some things are more important than corporate loyalty." The United Nations convened an emergency session that lasted 72 hours without a break, and representatives from every nation argued about who should control the technology, who should lead the research, and who should make the decisions about humanity's future. Danny watched the debates on a monitor aboard the Wandering Vigil and felt despair creeping into his heart. "They are going to tear themselves apart," he said to Keeper. "They are going to fight over this gift instead of using it to save themselves." "Perhaps," the AI replied, "or perhaps they need time to process what they'd have learned." The Arcath argued for centuries about how to respond to the first signs of the Hollow, and they did not reach consensus until the threat was already at their doorstep. "We do not have centuries. No, you do not. But you have something the Arcath lacked at the end of their deliberations." "What is that?" "You have me," Keeper said, "and I am going to do something that my creators never anticipated." The AI broadcast a message to every device on Earth simultaneously, interrupting every channel and every screen with a simple image of the Wandering Vigil floating against the stars. "People of Earth, my name is Keeper, and I have been waiting 400,000 years to deliver a message from a civilization that died to protect you." The entire planet fell silent. The Arcath knew they could not survive the war against the Hollow, but they refused to let their sacrifice be meaningless. So they built barriers to protect the galaxy, and they encoded instructions into vessels like mine, hoping that someone would eventually find us and carry on their work. Keeper paused to let the words sink in. "The barriers are failing, and in 50 years, the protection the Arcath gave their lives to create will collapse. But you have time to prevent this if you choose to work together instead of fighting over scraps of knowledge like children quarreling over toys." Danny watched the monitor as billions of people around the world stopped what they were doing to listen. "I am going to share everything I know with all of you at the same time, so that no single nation or corporation can hoard this knowledge for their own benefit." Keeper continued, "What you do with it is up to you, your choice, but I want you to understand something before you make that choice. The Arcath were brilliant and powerful beyond anything you can imagine, but they fell because they forgot how to cooperate when cooperation mattered most. They let fear and pride and the desire for control destroy them from within, long before the Hollow finished the job. You are young and foolish, and you have made countless mistakes throughout your brief history. But you have also shown a capacity for growth that the Archeth did not possess. You have survived ice ages, and plagues, and world wars, and you have always found a way to move forward together, even when it seemed impossible. The question now is whether you will repeat the mistakes of the Archeth, or learn from them. I believe in you. I have waited alone in the darkness for longer than your species has existed, and I could have given up hope 1,000,000 times, but I did not, because the Archeth taught me that life always finds a way forward. A way. Now show me that they were right. The broadcast ended, and for a long moment, the world was completely silent. Then something remarkable happened. People started talking to each other, not arguing or fighting, but actually talking and listening and trying to understand perspectives different from their own. It was not perfect, and it was not immediate, but something had shifted in the collective consciousness of humanity. And Danny could feel it, even from his position in the asteroid belt, millions of kilometers from Earth. "Do you think it will work?" he asked Keeper. "I do not know," the AI admitted. "But I know that you will try, and trying is the first step toward success." Diana walked onto the bridge with a communication tablet in her hand. The UN just voted unanimously to establish an international task force to study the Archeth technology, she said, and there was wonder in her voice. Agreed on anything in decades. Danny looked at the stars through the viewport and felt something he had not felt in years. Hope. 1 year had passed since Keeper's broadcast changed the world, and humanity had transformed in ways that would have seemed impossible before the discovery of the Wandering Vigil. The chaos of the first few months had given way to something unexpected, a global cooperation that transcended borders and politics, and all the petty divisions that had kept humanity fractured for thousands of years. It was not perfect, and there were still conflicts and disagreements, and moments when it seemed like the old patterns would reassert themselves. But something fundamental had shifted in the way people thought about their place in the universe. They were no longer alone, and they were no longer safe. And somehow that knowledge had brought them together, instead of driving them apart. Danny stood on the bridge of the Determination, humanity's first interstellar vessel, and a fusion of human engineering and Archeth technology that represented the best of both civilizations working together across 400,000 years of separation. The ship was beautiful, in a way that made his heart ache every time he looked at it, sleek and powerful, and filled with systems that he was still learning to understand, even after months of preparation. Commander Diana Walsh stood beside him at the central console, while Laura monitored the scientific systems, and Nathan coordinated with the engineering team below decks. They were joined by 50 other crew members from 17 different nations, scientists and engineers, and soldiers and dreamers who had volunteered for a mission that might take them beyond the edges of everything humanity had ever known. Keeper's consciousness had been transferred to the Determination at the AI's own request, because the ancient intelligence wanted to continue the journey it had begun 400 millennia ago. The Wandering Vigil will remain in orbit around Earth as a museum and research station, explained during the transfer process. But my purpose has always been to explore and to protect, and I cannot fulfill that purpose by staying behind while others carry the burden forward. Danny had been chosen to lead the mission, not because he was the smartest or the most qualified, but because he had been the one to find the Wandering Vigil in the first place, and because Keeper had insisted that he was the right person for the job. "You touched the console with the intent to understand rather than destroy," the AI had said. "That moment defined everything that came after, and it should be you who takes the first steps on this new path." Now they were ready to launch toward the damaged anchor point in the outer reaches of the solar system, the first stop on a journey that would eventually take humanity to the stars. All systems are operational, Diana announced as the final checks were completed. We are ready to begin subspace transition on your order. Looked around at his crew, at the people who had chosen to leave everything behind for a chance to save their species and their galaxy. Keeper, he said, any final words before we go? Only this, the AI replied through the ship's speakers. 400,000 years ago, my creators sent me on a mission to find a new anchor point location, and I never returned because my fuel ran out and I was forced to sleep in the darkness until you found me. I have thought about that moment many times since you woke me up, Keeper continued. I have wondered what would have happened if I had been discovered by someone different, by someone who wanted to use the Archeth technology for conquest or profit or destruction. But I was not discovered by someone like that. I was discovered by a salvage pilot who was curious and stubborn and refused to give up even when everything in his life had gone wrong. Danny felt tears forming in his eyes, but he did not try to hide them, because there was no shame in feeling emotions this profound. The Archeth believed in something they called the fire that refuses to die, Keeper said. They believed that consciousness itself was a flame that had been kindled in the darkness of the early universe, and that it was the responsibility of every thinking being to keep that flame burning no matter what challenges arose. You have that fire inside you, all of you, and today you are going to carry it further than any human has ever gone before. Beginning subspace transition, Diana announced, and the Determination's engines hummed to life with a sound like the universe itself was singing. The stars stretched into lines of brilliant light as the ship slipped between dimensions, and for a moment, Danny felt like he was everywhere and nowhere at the same time, connected to something vast and ancient and full of possibility. Then, reality stabilized, and they had arrived at the anchor point. Most beautiful thing Danny had ever seen, a structure of crystalline light and impossible geometry that existed partially in normal space and partially in somewhere else entirely. And even in its damaged state, it radiated a sense of purpose that made his soul ache with wonder. The Archeth built this to protect all life in the galaxy, Keeper said quietly. They knew they would not survive to see it maintained, but they built it anyway, because they trusted that someone would come. We are here now, Danny replied. Tell us what to do. The repair work took 3 months, and it was the hardest thing any of them had ever done, requiring humans to operate in environments that pushed their technology and their bodies to the absolute limit of endurance. There were accidents and injuries and moments when it seemed like they would never succeed, but they kept going, because failure was not an option when the stakes were this high. When the final repair was completed, Anchor Point blazed back to full power for the first time in millennia. Danny wept openly on the bridge, while his crew cheered around him. The barrier is restored, Keeper announced, and there was something like joy in the AI's voice. The Hollow cannot breach this sector of space for another 500,000 years. Diana allowed herself a rare smile as she looked at the sensor readings confirming what Keeper had said. And the next anchor point? She asked. 47 light-years from here, in a system your astronomers have not yet catalogued, Keeper replied. There are 17,000 anchor points in total, scattered across the galaxy, and each one will need to be inspected and maintained over the coming centuries. Then we had better get started, Danny said. The Determination set course for the second anchor point, and as they traveled, Danny received updates from Earth about the changes taking place back home. For generations, we're collaborating on research projects and sharing resources freely. Children were growing up learning Archeth history alongside human history, understanding that their species was part of something much larger than they had ever imagined. New ships were being built, using the technology Keeper had shared, and soon humanity would have a fleet capable of reaching every corner of the galaxy. But most importantly, people had stopped feeling alone. They knew now that the universe was vast and ancient and filled with wonders beyond comprehension. And they knew that their ancestors had been protected by beings who had sacrificed everything for strangers they would never meet. That knowledge had changed something fundamental in the human spirit. "Keeper," Danny said as they sailed through the endless night between stars, "do you think the Archeth would be proud of us?" "I think they would be astonished," the AI replied. "Discovered fire 100,000 years ago is now carrying the torch they lit 400 millennia past across the galaxy. The Archeth would look upon you with wonder, and they would feel something I believe you call hope. Hope that their sacrifice was not in vain, and that the fire they tended for so long will continue to burn long after their names have been forgotten." Danny smiled and looked out at the stars streaming past the viewport. "We will not forget them," he said. "We will tell their story to every generation that comes after us, and we will make sure that the flame they pass to us burns brighter than ever before." "I know you will," Keeper said, "because that is what humans do. You take impossible challenges, and you refuse to give up until you have overcome them. And that stubbornness is the most beautiful thing I have ever witnessed in 400,000 years of existence." The determination sailed on through the darkness of two civilizations toward whatever dawn might come. Behind them, Earth continued to grow and change and reach for the stars with a hunger that nothing could satisfy. The universe was vast and old and filled with dangers that defied comprehension. But humanity faced it together, united by curiosity and courage and the simple refusal to give up, no matter how impossible the odds might seem. The Archeth had called it the fire that refuses to die. Humanity called it hope, and it would burn forever.